No one in that town hall noticed the little girl at first. She sat quietly on the hard wooden bench near the back, her legs swinging, a worn notebook open in her lap. Most people thought she was just waiting for her mother to finish cleaning the building. But before the night was over, every single person in that room would be watching her, depending on her, and remembering her face. Her mother, Maria, worked the late shift as a janitor at City Hall. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid the rent and kept food on the table. Most evenings, Maria brought her daughter, Sophia, along. It was safer than leaving her home alone, and besides, Sophia liked to sit with her notebook, copying down new words she had learned from school or from the old tapes her father once played for her. Her father had passed away 2 years earlier, but he had left her with something priceless, a love for languages. He had been a teacher, and he told Sophia that every language was like a bridge, something that helped people truly see one another. Even at 13, she believed him. She practiced whenever she could, whispering words under her breath in Spanish, in Arabic, sometimes even in French. That night, though, Sophia wasn't practicing. She was just waiting. The hum of voices drifted from the chamber ahead, where a heated town meeting was underway. City leaders were discussing a new development project. Rows of residents had shown up, many of them immigrants who spoke little English. They were worried the project would push them out of their homes, and they had come to be heard. Through the crack in the open doors, Sophia could hear the frustration rising. Words clashed, overlapping, tangled between English and Spanish. She saw her mother pause in the hallway, tightening her grip on the mop handle as if she could feel the tension too. For a moment, it seemed like just another evening where her mother worked and she waited. But deep inside, Sophia felt something shift. She didn't know why, not yet. All she knew was that her quiet corner would not stay quiet for long, and in just a little while, all those voices in the chamber would turn to her, the girl no one had noticed. The voices inside the chamber grew louder. Chairs scraped against the floor, hands waved in frustration, and the air felt heavy with misunderstanding. City officials sat stiffly behind their long wooden table, reading from reports that no one in the crowd seemed to trust. Across the aisle, families leaned forward, trying to make sense of the words, some whispering hurried translations to each other. A man in the front row stood up, his voice sharp in Spanish. He was angry, not because he wanted to cause trouble, but because no one seemed to hear what he was trying to say. Sophia could catch enough of his words to understand. He was worried about rent, about losing the apartment his family had lived in for 10 years. But the officials only exchanged nervous glances, waiting for the interpreter to step in. The interpreter, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, lifted her microphone. She translated a few lines, but her voice cracked under the pressure. She was juggling too many voices at once, switching back and forth as the crowd erupted in more questions. The officials' answers only came out colder, more distant. The gap between the two sides widened with every word. From her bench in the hallway, Sophia hugged her notebook close. She understood just enough to know that people were talking past one another, not to one another. Her mother whispered, "This is why I never stay near these meetings. Too much anger." She tried to steer Sophia back toward the cleaning cart, but the girl's eyes stayed locked on the chamber doors. Then, as if the night had been waiting for one more turn, the interpreter swayed. She pressed a hand to her forehead, her skin pale. Before anyone could reach her, she collapsed, her headset clattering against the table. Gasps filled the room. People rushed forward, calling for help. Paramedics were summoned, and the meeting ground to a halt. The mayor rubbed his temples, already sensing what this meant. Without an interpreter, the conversation couldn't go on. The residents in the crowd muttered in frustration, some grabbing their coats as if ready to leave. Sophia felt her heart hammering in her chest. She looked up at her mother, who shook her head quickly. "Don't even think about it." But Sophia couldn't look away from that empty chair at the front of the room, the microphone still lying there, waiting. And as the first families started heading for the door, she realised that maybe no one else would step forward. Maybe it had to be her. The chamber was in disarray. Officials whispered among themselves, their faces tight with worry. Without an interpreter, the meeting could not go forward, and every second of silence made the crowd angrier. A mother with 2 small children tugged on her husband's sleeve, urging him toward the exit. An older man shook his head and muttered that coming here had been a waste of time. Sophia gripped her notebook so tightly her knuckles turned white. She could still hear her father's voice in her memory, telling her that words were bridges, not walls, but she was just a girl, barely 13, sitting in sneakers and a faded hoodie. Who would believe she belonged up there? Her mother leaned close, whispering with urgency. "Don't even think about it. This is not our place. We just clean here." Her words carried both fear and love, the kind that wanted to protect her daughter from embarrassment, from risk. But Sophia's eyes kept drifting back to that empty chair at the front. The headset lay abandoned, wires curled like waiting hands. The microphone blinked a red light as if it too was searching for a voice. Another man in the crowd rose and began shouting in Spanish, frustration spilling into the air. Officials sat frozen, their folders useless in front of them. The mayor finally stood, his gavel tapping against the wood, but it did nothing to calm the storm. And then, before she could talk herself out of it, Sophia slid off the bench. Her sneakers squeaked on the polished floor as she walked toward the chamber doors. Her mother reached for her sleeve, but Sophia had already stepped into the light. Dozens of eyes turned at once. Some showed surprise, others confusion. A girl, just a child, walking steadily toward the empty interpreter's seat. Her mother called out softly, "Sophia, please." But the room had gone quiet now, waiting to see what this girl would do next. And with every step closer to that microphone, Sophia knew there was no turning back. The sound of her footsteps echoed across the chamber floor. Sophia felt every eye on her, yet she kept walking. She wasn't tall enough to see over the council table, but she stopped beside the empty chair and placed her notebook on it as if it belonged there. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. The mayor frowned, half ready to wave her away. "Young lady, this is not," he began. But before he could finish, Sophia lifted her chin and spoke in Spanish. Her voice was small at first, but clear. She repeated the words of the man who had been shouting moments earlier, his fear of being forced out of his home, his anger at not being heard. She translated his pain into English, steadying her tone so that it sounded firm but respectful. The officials blinked, startled. The man in the crowd looked equally stunned, then slowly nodded. He added another sentence in Spanish, and Sophia caught it, translated it again. This time her voice was stronger, carrying across the room. A ripple of murmurs spread through the chamber. No one had expected this. A girl, not much older than the children fidgeting in the back row, stepping into the role that adults had failed to fill. Her mother stood frozen near the doorway, torn between pride and fear. She wanted to rush forward, to pull her daughter back into safety, but something in Sophia's steady posture stopped her. The mayor cleared his throat, uncertain now. He leaned down and whispered to another official, who only shrugged helplessly. The room seemed to hover in fragile silence, waiting to see if this child could really hold it together. Sophia took a breath. She opened her notebook, running her finger over the words she had written weeks ago, and prepared to translate the mayor's reply. And as she lifted her eyes to the crowd, she saw one man step forward with a hard, skeptical look, ready to test her in a way no one else dared. The man who stepped forward was tall, his voice sharp as he spoke in rapid Spanish. His words weren't just angry, they were challenging. "Are we supposed to trust a child?" he said, looking straight at her. "If you think you can speak for us, then prove it." The room fell still. Some leaned forward, curious. Others shook their heads, convinced this was the moment she would falter. Even the mayor sat back in his chair, his eyes heavy with doubt. Sophia's pulse hammered in her ears. She understood the man's words, most of them, but the speed rattled her. Her throat tightened, and for a moment she thought about stepping down. Then she remembered her father's voice. "Slow it down, listen for the pieces. You don't need to be perfect, you just need to carry the meaning." She lifted the microphone. "He says..." Her voice cracked. She paused, fumbling with a phrase, mixing the order of words in English. A few people murmured. Sophia's cheeks burned, but she caught herself, corrected the sentence and pushed through. "He says he does not trust this process. He fears being pushed out of his home." The man crossed his arms, unimpressed. He fired back another line in Spanish, longer, more complicated. Sophia froze, flipping through her notebook, her fingers trembling as she searched for the right word. It wouldn't come. The man scowled until another resident near him gently repeated the sentence slower, softer, giving Sophia a chance to hear it again. She latched onto the familiar sounds, pulled the meaning together and tried again. This time her translation landed clean. It wasn't flawless, but it was honest. And the man who had tested her paused, his stern face easing just a fraction. He gave the smallest nod, not of approval, but of recognition. She had stood her ground. The crowd murmured, some surprised, some relieved. For a moment, Sophia let out the breath she'd been holding. She wasn't perfect, but she didn't have to be. Then, before she could settle, another voice rose from the back. A woman spoke, not in Spanish this time, but in Arabic. Her words were calm, yet filled with urgency. And in that instant, Sophia realised this night would demand more from her than she ever imagined. The woman's voice carried softly but firmly in Arabic, filling the chamber with words most could not understand. She clutched a folded paper, her hands shaking as she spoke. Though the language was foreign to most ears, the pain behind it was unmistakable. Every face turned back to Sophia. The officials glanced at one another helplessly. The mayor rubbed his brow. Without an interpreter, the words might as well have been silence. Sophia's chest tightened. Arabic was the hardest language her father had taught her, the one she barely practiced outside their kitchen table. She caught fragments: bait, home, ajar, rent, cough, fear. But the sentences blurred together too fast. Her mother stepped closer, whispering urgently, "Enough, Sophia, please, it's too much." The fear in her mother's voice was raw, protective. Sophia's throat went dry. She opened her mouth anyway, her voice unsteady. She says... She stumbled, misplacing a word, then tried again, her cheeks flushing as a few people murmured. "She says she is afraid. She says the rent is too high. She says she has nowhere to go." The woman stopped speaking, her brows furrowed. For a heartbeat, Sophia panicked. Had she said it wrong? But then the woman repeated one word gently, slowly, shaping it with her lips. Sophia nodded quickly, correcting herself, this time landing closer to the meaning. The woman's face softened. Tears welled in her eyes as she gave Sophia a small, trembling smile. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. Her voice had crossed the bridge. The crowd grew quiet. For the first time that night, the anger gave way to something else, listening. The council members leaned forward, scribbling notes. The weight of the woman's fear now hung heavy in English too, undeniable. Maria pressed her hands together at her chest, torn between worry and pride. Her daughter was risking humiliation in front of the entire room, yet she refused to stop. And just as a fragile calm began to settle, another voice stirred. It was deeper, firmer, with the edge of authority. A councilman was speaking now, not in another language but in English, ready to question whether a child belonged at the centre of it all. And for Sophia, this challenge would cut deeper than words. The man who had spoken was Councilman Harris, a figure everyone in town knew. His grey suit looked sharp under the chamber lights, but his voice carried the weight of authority more than his appearance did. He leaned forward, his tone cutting through the room. "This is highly irregular," he said, his words measured, cold. "We cannot entrust this meeting to a child. This is official business. Step down, young lady, before this becomes a circus." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some nodded, agreeing with him. Others shook their heads, unwilling to lose the one voice that was finally helping them be heard. Sophia froze. Her throat felt dry. She wasn't supposed to be here. Her mother was right. She was just the janitor's daughter. She wasn't on anyone's list. She had no title, no permission. Maria, standing by the wall, clenched her hands together. She wanted nothing more than to pull her daughter back into safety, but she could see the faces of the residents, their hope resting on a girl who wasn't afraid to listen. Before she could speak, a teacher from the back row stood. He was Mr. Alvarez, the high school Spanish teacher who had taught half the children in that neighbourhood. His voice rang out steady and strong. "With all respect, Councilman, she's the only one in this room who's making sense of what people are saying. You want order? Let her speak." The crowd erupted, half in applause, half in argument. The tension twisted tighter, like a rope pulled from both ends. Councilman Harris narrowed his eyes, clearly unshaken, clearly ready to push back harder. Sophia gripped the microphone stand, her knuckles white. Every instinct told her to shrink, to run back to her mother's side. But another instinct, smaller, quieter, but steadier, told her not to let go. And as the chamber erupted in divided voices, all of them louder than she had ever heard, she realised that her next words might decide whether the meeting collapsed or held together. The chamber had become a storm of voices, some cheering, some shouting, some pleading to be heard. The wooden gavel struck again and again, but even the mayor's sharp taps barely cut through the noise. Sophia stood gripping the microphone, her chest rising and falling fast. For a moment she felt swallowed by the sound, a small girl against a wall of grown-ups. But then, out of the corner of her eye, she caught her mother's gaze. Maria wasn't smiling, but her eyes held something steady, something that said, "You can choose, you're not alone." Sophia raised the microphone closer. She spoke first in Spanish, then in English, her voice trembling at the start but growing stronger with each word. Everyone here wants the same thing. You want a home. You want to be heard. You want respect. The words weren't fancy. They weren't pulled from law books or policy papers. They were plain, but they carried the truth. The room quieted, just enough for her to keep going. She repeated the woman's fears about rent, the man's worries about eviction, the council's promise to review the project. Piece by piece, she stitched the conversation back together. Mr. Alvarez leaned forward, nodding, giving her small signals that she was on the right path. Even the sceptical councilman stopped interrupting, his jaw tight but his eyes fixed on her. Sophia's hands still shook, but her voice kept finding its way. She wasn't inventing solutions, she was simply making sure each voice crossed the bridge to the other side. And as she did, the anger in the room shifted, thinning into something else. Not agreement, not yet, but the first threads of understanding. Her mother pressed a hand to her heart. For years she had been invisible in this building, sweeping floors while people walked past without looking. Now it was her daughter standing at the centre, and for the first time Maria felt seen too. But just as calm began to return, the mayor leaned into his microphone. His voice was low, measured. "This meeting cannot continue like this. We need an official decision now." And with those words, everyone turned to the council table, waiting to see if the girl's fragile bridge would be strong enough to hold. The mayor's words about making an official decision silenced the chamber. Every pair of eyes turned to the council table, where the members leaned together, voices sharp but hushed. Papers shuffled, pens tapped nervously against wood. From her spot at the microphone, Sophia's knees trembled. She had carried voices across 2 languages, but this part was out of her hands. What if none of it mattered? What if the council sent everyone home with nothing but broken promises? Councilman Harris spoke first, his tone clipped. "This is a spectacle. A child with a notebook cannot dictate city policy. We end the meeting now." His words landed heavy, and some residents groaned in protest. Another council member shook her head. "You've missed the point," she shot back. For the first time in years, these families feel heard. Ending now would betray that. The debate grew heated. One argued about rules, another about responsibility, another about the risk of losing control. Their voices overlapped, growing sharper, until it felt like the fragile peace in the room might shatter at any moment. Sophia's fingers dug into the microphone stand. She wanted to speak, to beg them not to let this fall apart. But she was just a kid, and every adult at that table seemed bigger, louder, more powerful. The residents shifted restlessly. Some began muttering about walking out. Maria's heart pounded as she watched her daughter stand in silence, so small against the weight of authority. Then the woman council member leaned forward again, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Listen to them. Not to me, not to the mayor. Listen to them." She gestured toward the crowd, where dozens of faces waited, holding on to the last thread of hope. For the first time, even Councilman Harris hesitated. He glanced at the families, then at Sophia, who stood trembling but unflinching, still holding her ground. The mayor finally exhaled, his voice tired but steady. The project will be paused. We will meet with community leaders before moving forward. Tonight, we have heard you. The chamber erupted, not in anger, but in applause, in tears, in the sound of relief. Parents hugged children, neighbours clasped hands. For a moment, the building that had felt so divided was filled with unity. Maria rushed forward, wrapping her arms around Sophia. "You did it," she whispered. Her daughter sagged into the embrace, exhausted, overwhelmed. But as the cheers echoed, Sophia noticed a man near the back of the room, phone in hand. Its red light blinked, recording everything. And she had no idea that by morning the whole town would be watching. By the next morning, the video had already made its way around town. It first appeared on a neighbourhood Facebook group, then spread to a few local pages and community forums. Parents shared it with one another. Neighbours sent it in group texts. By noon, it had reached the county news, then the state paper. People watched not because the chamber looked impressive, but because of the girl at the microphone, the janitor's daughter clutching her notebook, refusing to step back when everyone expected her to stay silent. At school, Sophia kept her head down, embarrassed when classmates stared. But instead of teasing, they came up with quiet words. That was brave. "My mum cried watching you." She didn't know how to respond, but she felt something she hadn't before, that she mattered outside the walls of her own home. For Maria, the change was subtle but powerful. She still wore her janitor's uniform, still pushed her mop down the long halls of City Hall. But now, people who had once passed her without a glance stopped to say hello. A council member even paused to thank her, not for the cleaning, but for raising a daughter with courage. That evening, when the noise had quieted, Sophia sat cross-legged on her bed with her notebook open. The pages were filled with scribbles in different languages, some smudged with eraser marks. She ran her hand over them, remembering her father's patient voice. She had stumbled, she had hesitated, but she had not walked away. Maria knocked softly before coming in. She sat on the edge of the bed and brushed a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "Your father would be proud," she whispered. Sophia leaned into her, eyes wet, the tears this time born not of fear, but of something steadier, belonging. Outside, the world kept moving. The project still faced debates, and not every problem was solved. But the people who had been there that night, and the ones who watched the video after, would remember. They would remember that a 13-year-old girl stitched voices together when no one else could. And they would remember that sometimes the smallest voice in the room is the one that carries everyone across. Lesson: true strength doesn't always come from titles or power. Sometimes it comes from the courage to speak up, to listen, and to build bridges when no one else dares. Even the smallest voice can change the direction of a room and remind us that respect and understanding are the foundations of any community. Thank you so much for staying with us until the very end of this story. I'm truly grateful for your time and presence here. If you enjoyed it, please give this video a like and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. I'll see you again soon, right here on Rain Inside.